Okay, class, settle down, settle down. I hope you all enjoyed your break. Or at the very least, you all enjoyed it more than I enjoyed grading your papers. I would advise you all to take much better notes on future lectures than you did on the ones you recently wrote your papers on. Some of you will likely be repeating my class. I will not name names now. However, Carl, you need to be in your seat, not over by that table. You're not turning in any assignments right now. That is where we turn in assignments. Now, on to business at hand. We talked last class about the pocket watch war and the results thereof. Now we can talk about some of the lasting effects of that war. Now, one of the major questions after the war dealt with a structure or area called the spell hold. Now, you might not be fully familiar with the spell hold if you didn't do the reading, but surely I can count on everyone in this classroom to have done the reading. But just in case not everyone did, Carl, would you tell us about the spell hold? Carl? You didn't do the reading, did you, Carl? Magdalena, would you tell us about the spell hold? Excellent, thank you. Yes, that is correct. The spell hold may or may not have actually existed. That is why your reading last night dealt with multiple competing theories as to where the term came from, what precisely it may or may not have been, and who would or would not have been involved in building it. Now, who are the primary individuals we believe to have been involved in creating that particular structure? Yes, David. Thank you. That is correct. The Bonebreaker clan of the dwarves, they are the ones who provided the lion's share of the labor and materials for the construction of the spellhold. And they were working primarily with which two individuals? Carol? That is correct. Archmage Summers and Master Artificer Treespocket. Those would have been the two foremen of the projects, so to speak. Now, also working tightly with them would have been Stonebrow Bonebreaker, a member of the leadership of the Bonebreaker clan. Now, after the Burning Line, after the end of the war with the Skyfall incident and then the subsequent disappearance of the Marble Mountain, much of our information on the Spellhold was lost. Many of those records would have been located in or near the Marble Mountain and would have disappeared along with the mountain, and any stored in the outskirts of that area would have been destroyed by the Skyfall. However, some records did, in various states of being blown apart or lost in various other means, survive to this day. Their reliability, of course, is questionable, and their completeness is, of course, lacking. Recovering further records, of course, is a matter of expeditions into the wastes, and that's where we get into the meat of the issue. As we are the Fighters College, our job primarily involves security, strategy, tactics, and combat. So we are not particularly interested in precisely what is in each and every piece of paper, but more in the acquisition of those records. And what is the primary obstacle to the acquisition of those records? Daniel. That is correct, the Ash zombies. And now, how do they differ from regular zombies? Well, you see, they have some form of magical radiation and additional effects that make them far more dangerous than the ordinary undead. Now, these creatures started appearing after the Skyfall incident, after the disappearance of the Marble Mountain, of course, and they have proven a large barrier to any expansion in that direction, with one primary exception, that being who precisely? This one is important. I expect everyone to have this in their notes. Anyone? Magdalena, yes. That's correct. That's the Goblin Hegemony, because they can operate in waste without fear of that magical radiation, which makes them less vulnerable, and also should be factoring into your strategic considerations when you do your strategic limitations paper on this region. Yes, Carl, that would be a major factor. That's why I just said it. Yes. Well, I don't know, Carl. You tell me. If one side in a conflict is able to move through an entire region safely and no other side in that conflict is, would that be a major strategic factor, or would it not? Your paper is going to be a joy to read. Now, when records such as these are failing us, as in this case they often are, fortunately the fact that they are will prove rather profitable for many of you once you graduate, as getting contracted to search for this information is quite lucrative for those with the capabilities to not get themselves and everyone they're responsible for killed in the process. Some of you will make some money doing this. Some of you, well, best not to consider what's going to happen to others that try. So, unfortunately, with the absence of good records, other information has to be acquired via word of mouth. And that's where we come back to our friend Stonebrow. Now, he did share information after this event about this project, and many of his claims are the basis for most of our information on the Spellhold. Unfortunately, one group of adventurers in particular, this will be I do not quite recall the name of these adventurers. So let's say I will offer let's make that 5 points of extra credit to the student that finds that information first for me after class. But this group of adventurers did manage to encounter Stonebrow and take him prisoner at some point, attempting to get information on the Spellhold. Now, it is well known that most people will eventually talk. However, that does not mean the methodology employed by this particular group of adventurers was effective. While most people will eventually talk, there are some that won't talk fast enough to save their own lives, Stonebrow being one of this group. In the attempt to extract the information, the adventurers ended up only with something in need of burying. Now, naturally, much of the rest of his family and associates are no longer located anywhere that anyone without extensive intelligence apparati can locate. This is probably because of what happened to Mr. Stonebrow. As such, the less precise methods of field work, namely trekking out into the wastes and having a look, are what is left to those who are searching for the Spellhold. This, of course, has not made things better in the post-war political situation. Of course, the Rock Gnomes themselves are gone, along with the Wizards of the Marble Alliance, hence the value of searching for the Spellhold in the first place. And the territory itself is largely unoccupied due to having very little resource value, or at least in terms of easily extractable resource value. As such, the kingdom is not particularly capable of expanding into it. Again, their resource situation is tied directly to the lands they occupy, and attempting to occupy resourceless land would cause a breakdown in their existing logistical structure. This should seem familiar to anyone who remembered to do the readings on Chapter 2 last week. Now, we, of course, do have some exceptions to that. As we mentioned, the expansion of the goblin hegemony is starting to make inroads into the area, which is why we now see a large goblin stronghold in the center of the wastes. This could prove either incredibly dangerous or incredibly helpful to an expedition in search of this spellhold. It all depends on how good you are at not pissing off goblins. Yes, that is a valuable strategic skill. No, we're not going to tell the story of how I know that right now. Now, outside of just the ash zombies, there are an assortment of other monsters and creatures throughout the wastes, as all want to be in any vaguely dangerous and barely inhabited area. And these will also keep the gods of any research expedition very busy and very well paid. So now we're going to break briefly for lunch. When you come back, I expect each and every one of you to be ready to start work on a draft of their drafts of their expedition contracts. I will go through these and review them and also catch any missed terms and punctuation. Remember, you want a good contract when you go looking for an expedition employer. You want to make sure that you get paid on time, and if possible, in advance. Trust me, nothing is more disappointing than coming back from an expedition to find that your erstwhile employer doesn't actually have what they promised you. This can get very, very bloody and very, very tedious very quickly. Class dismissed.